For more than 25 years, the United States sought unsuccessfully to compel North Korea to make a strategic decision about its nuclear weapons program. In one of history's great ironies, a deeply flawed summit between US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has actually made North Korea's strategic decision quite clear, at least to me. We now know Kim Jong-un's intentions, his true intentions. He plans to keep his nuclear weapons. He plans to freeze nuclear and ballistic missile testing, which he's already done, and to offer to Washington the vague promise of future denuclearization, a promise he does not plan to keep. The Singapore summit, as you will recall, was filled with made-for-television moments, very impressive optics, but sorely lacking in actual substance. It, quite frankly, did nothing to bring about actual progress in the denuclearization of North Korea. The two leaders, President Trump and Chairman Kim, went into that summit without a common definition even of what the word denuclearization meant. The two leaders left the summit still far apart on that definition, and this explains the current impasse in the talks that we are facing. For the United States, denuclearization means what the dictionary says it means: the end of North Korea's nuclear weapons program, period. For Pyongyang, it means something very different. The phrase the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula means, and I'll be very blunt here, eliminating America's ability to defend its Korean and Japanese allies and America's ability to deter North Korea, the defanging of the US military presence in this region. The United States insists that North Korea agreed to denuclearize at the Singapore summit. But for Pyongyang, the summit was not about denuclearization. The summit was about removing the US threat, their word, and ending sanctions. In fact, Pyongyang has described all of the US demands that have been made, both at the summit and subsequently, that North Korea take concrete steps to denuclearize. They had described those demands as cancerous and gangster-like, their words. Meanwhile, the US intelligence community, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and leading experts have all concluded that North Korea is actually enhancing its nuclear weapons and missile capabilities, even without conducting testing of those systems. So I would say that North Korea's nuclear and missile programs are quite frankly alive and well. This is in keeping with Kim Jong-un's instructions. On January 1st of last year, Kim Jong-un called on the nation to mass produce nuclear weapons and missiles. And in April of last year, he praised the completion of North Korea's state nuclear force. And he declared that nuclear weapons are, and these are his words, the firm guarantee by which our descendants can enjoy the most dignified and happy life in the world. Today, the evidence, including Kim Jong-un's own words, tells us that Pyongyang is not serious about denuclearization. It suggests that North Korea intends to keep and even strengthen its nuclear and missile capabilities, even as it pursues talks with the United States and with the Republic of Korea. Today, a second US DPRK summit appears to be on the near-term horizon. And with that in mind, we should acknowledge that Pyongyang is not acting in good faith. It is now time, as I suggested earlier, to think about Plan B. And we should start this reconsideration with a reassessment of the current approach that we are taking towards North Korea and acknowledge what the facts tell us about Pyongyang's intentions. North Korea's strategic game plan is now quite evident, and it consists of 5 elements, and let me run through them very quickly. The first element of the North's game plan is what I call gaining nuclear acceptance. Pyongyang believes it will ultimately be accepted as a de facto nuclear weapons state. North Korea knows that this will not take place in any formal way, but it has already sought to create a new reality through Kim Jong-un's declaration on January 1st last year that the DPRK had completed the development of its state nuclear force. This year, in his address, Kim Jong-un saw no need to refer to his nuclear forces in his January 1st speech. Why? Because Pyongyang regards its new nuclear status as a given. Having achieved its nuclear and missile goals, Pyongyang can now eliminate its testing programs and related facilities. These are no longer needed, and if they were needed, they can easily be reconstituted. The North may offer to permanently suspend or even dismantle its ICBM program, and you've heard reports suggesting that they are considering that. And that, of course, is a step that the United States president might find quite attractive. But it's also a step that would leave the North's medium and short-range missiles and its nuclear weapons pointed at America's Japanese and South Korean allies, and of course at U.S. bases in the Western Pacific. Pyongyang may also offer, as General Lee suggested in his remarks, arms control negotiations with the United States, or perhaps even propose a long-term negotiating process nominally aimed at denuclearization. The substantial, verifiable, and irreversible steps that it would have to take would not occur until far off into the future. And by deferring what it has no intention of doing in the first place, Pyongyang would have made its nuclear status all but permanent. The second element of North Korea's game plan is what I call normalization. North Korea is seeking to normalize its relations with the international community to gain acceptance as a normal country and a reliable dialogue partner. A dialogue partner that just happens to be a nuclear-armed state. North Korea has largely succeeded in this goal, in my view. The speed with which the Republic of Korea and the United States have responded to Kim's initial overtures last year has been truly astonishing. We saw this again recently when the Blue House reacted immediately and enthusiastically to Kim Jong-un's New Year's address, even though Kim Jong-un offered nothing on denuclearization, and despite his call for the Republic of Korea to take steps that would amount to abandoning its alliance with the United States, and that would be the price that the ROK would have to pay for continued North-South reconciliation. Kim Jong-un has sought to portray himself as a normal leader, a reasonable interlocutor, and a statesman. And here, too, to some degree, he succeeded. The U.S. president has praised Kim's talent as a negotiator and called him honorable and a man of courage. The third element of North Korea's strategy is what I call changing the subject. Pyongyang intends to try to shift the main topic of negotiations with the United States away from denuclearization, the topic that Washington wants to talk about, and to the subjects that Pyongyang prefers to discuss: improving relations, easing sanctions and pressure, eliminating the U.S. military threat, and ending the state of war on the Korean Peninsula. That last goal is particularly important since, in Pyongyang's mind, it would eliminate the rationale for the continued U.S. military presence on this peninsula. The main message that Kim Jong-un conveyed to the United States in his January 1st speech earlier this month relates to this element of the North Korean game plan. Kim demanded that the United States relax its sanctions and pressure campaign and cease its unilateral demands. And by that, of course, he means stop asking North Korea to take denuclearization steps. Kim said that U.S. failure to respond positively would compel the DPRK to explore a new way to defending the sovereignty of our country and supreme interests of our state. The implied threat in that statement, I think, is fairly clear. The fourth element of the North's game plan is what I call creating the illusion of denuclearization. Pyongyang insists that its suspension of nuclear and ballistic missile testing and the destruction of the tunnel entrances at its nuclear test facility are denuclearization steps. While these moves are, of course, welcome, they do not constitute denuclearization. The experts tell us the DPRK's nuclear and missile programs are continuing. But North Korea seems to be succeeding to some degree in creating the illusion that it is denuclearizing, and we must not accept that. Policymakers must not allow Pyongyang to redefine denuclearization, nor should they accept anything less than concrete and verifiable steps that lead to the end of the North's nuclear program. Finally, the fifth element of North Korea's game plan is what I call sharpening the wedge. Perhaps the most consequential element of the DPRK's game plan is its goal to divide the United States and South Korea. There are troubling signs that Pyongyang now sees a real opportunity in the coming months to damage the alliance. North Korea's ultimate goal remains the unification of the Korean Peninsula under its rule. That cannot be achieved as long as the ROK is allied with the United States. While Pyongyang cannot drive the United States off the peninsula, it knows that political dynamics here in the Republic of Korea and difficulties, ongoing difficulties between the United States and its ROK ally on a number of issues are ripe for exploitation. Kim Jong-un's January 1st speech last year was crafted to appeal to pan-Korean nationalism, to an aspirational South Korean vision of reconciliation and reunification, to latent anti-American sentiment, and to an ideological stratum of South Korean society that remains occasionally sympathetic to the North. Kim's message struck a powerful chord here in the South. Seoul, of course, moved with remarkable speed in responding to Kim's overture. Olympic participation, North-South summits, North-South liaison office in Kaesong, reconnection of hotlines, etc., etc. All of those things and more took place with head-spinning rapidity. Things happened so quickly that it raised an alarm in Washington that the pace of North-South reconciliation was exceeding what the politics, the diplomacy, and the military realities on the peninsula could sustain. Contradictions arose between the pace and scope of North-South dialogue on the one hand, and U.S. insistence on the other hand that sanctions needed to be maintained and even strengthened. There were concerns in Washington that military steps taken by the North and the South could undermine readiness and intelligence gathering capability. Breaks in coordination and communication between Washington and Seoul were becoming evident and worrisome. There was concern that Seoul seemed to be serving as North Korea's friend in court as it argued for preemptively easing sanctions on North Korea in order to induce the North's cooperation on denuclearization. That position, of course, was directly counter to the U.S. position. In his New Year's address, demanded that Seoul end the abnormal situation on the Korean Peninsula, his words, in which South Korea has sided with the United States against the North. He proposed that Seoul and Pyongyang pursue sovereign or independent reunification. Translation, keep the Americans out of it. In this year's address, Kim made his point even clearer, calling for the South to cease joint military exercises with outside military forces, guess who? And to suspend its acquisition of war equipment, including strategic assets from outside. Kim was essentially telling the South that the time has come for Seoul to choose between reconciling with the North and maintaining its traditional alliance with the United States. The new U.S.-ROK Joint Working Group to coordinate the Allies' respective approaches to North Korea was a necessary and timely move in this context. If the new mechanism works well and properly, we can hope there will be fewer policy surprises between the Allies. Nevertheless, Kim Jong-un's January 1st speech this year suggests that he believes Seoul could be now a soft target for the North's appeals to nationalism and anti-alliance sentiment. Kim Jong-un is probably encouraged by those here in the South who are calling for the ROK government to coach North Korea on how to deal with Washington. North Korea surely welcomes those in the ROK who argue that South Korea should rid itself of its alliance with the United States, as one prominent advisor to the government here said a few weeks ago. Kim Jong-un is also no doubt encouraged by the recent resignation of Secretary of Defense Mattis, who had been one of the strongest advocates of the US-ROK alliance. The surprising decision to withdraw troops from Syria and Afghanistan by the United States was certainly welcome news in Pyongyang. And Mattis's departure leaves the US-ROK alliance open, I'm being very frank here, to the impulses of an American president who has made no secret of his opposition to America's traditional alliances, and who has actually called in the past for the end of the US military presence in the ROK. And I should add that the breakdown in burden-sharing talks sends a particularly bad message, particularly to President Trump, who sees the alliance in largely transactional terms. So in closing, let me suggest that Kim Jong-un's attack on the US-ROK alliance, his appeals to sympathetic elements in the South, Seoul's preoccupation with reconciliation and reunification, and the enigmatic impulses of an American president who has questioned the value of the US-ROK alliance, all of those things are taking US-South Korea relations into uncharted and potentially dangerous waters. So for both Washington and Seoul, perhaps it is time to look at Plan B. Thank you very much.